Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Pleased to be talking today about the State of Incident Response 2021. I want to welcome to the virtual studio Greg Bailey, the Director of Incident Handling with Red Canary, and Keith McCammon, as Chief Security Officer and co-founder of Red Canary. Keith, Greg, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Thanks for having us.
So start out here. Maybe Keith, you can tackle this first. You recently partnered with VMware and Kroll to conduct a State of Incident Response survey. What motivated you to do this specifically now, after the interesting times we've had?
The thing that led us to look at this in the first place was just an increased volume of incident response support that Red Canary provides to customers through our partners. And so this is less our existing MDR customers who are paying and relying on us to make sure that they don't have major incidents in the first place. But as we worked with Kroll and others, and for anyone who's been paying any attention to the news, right? Ransomware, extortion, a variety of these threats have just they continue to pick up speed and momentum. And from our perspective, it was there are a lot of good reports related to threat trends. Verizon and others do a really great job, Mandiant, at looking at overall trends as it relates to incident response. From companies that just do that tremendous volume. But the thing that we was really missing was the understanding of customer problems. As an organization that's going to be affected by an incident at some point, really not knowing A, how good of an understanding they had of all of the things required to put an incident response program and plan in place. B, their confidence in their ability to execute those different parts of it. And so really this was our first attempt at getting some data to understand what are those customer problems, what are those customers' concerns, so that we can figure out how to provide them more effective solutions. And I think that's the net of why we did that.
So what were some of your key findings in this survey? And the question I love to ask is, what surprised you?
I think what surprised me the most was that I think it was half of the responses, the folks who responded, half of them were not able to contain a threat in under an hour. And being from a pen test or red team background, that's a long time. An hour is enough time for any malicious actor or threat actor to do a lot of damage and then disappear. And when I say disappear, blend in, right? We may see the artifacts and the kind of mess that they've left behind, but they have already spread and moved laterally within that organization. And that's a scary thought to me, because right there, right when that initial foothold happens, that may be our best opportunity to stop that thing from spreading, whatever it is, right? So in the context of ransomware, if we can see it right away, we can stop it before it's too late, because we know how quickly these things can spread. So to me, that was both surprising and kind of disturbing in some ways. So that was the number that stuck out to me.
So I spoke about the timing of this a few minutes ago. How has the threat landscape shifted over the past year plus as we've dealt with the pandemic? And how's that further challenged your traditional incident response programs?
I'll take a first pass at it. I don't think we need to beat the drum of things like ransomware and extortion, the kind of threat trend, any more than we probably already have. I think we do a pretty good enough job of socializing that stuff in a variety of ways. But that has been that's been the prevailing threat trend, I would say. When it comes to incident response, the thing that is most interesting, at least to me, is kind of always trying to figure out how these things, the technical and kind of the business shifts are taking place. And one of the most fascinating parts, watching the IR industry in particular, is that so much of that is, when we talk about the importance of having plans and having partnerships and relationships and just knowing, thinking through what you're going to do ahead of time. Such an incredible percentage of incident response now is not what it was 10 years ago, right? Where it really led is a very, very forensics heavy discipline, deep technical expertise, really had to have this unique mix of technology expertise, like adversary understanding, intelligence in order to do incident response. Like the last year or two have flipped that on its head, right? Like so much of incident response now is like who has the relationships with, like, sadly, not just like insurance providers and legal firms, but like who can you use to negotiate a ransom if it comes down to it? We'd always prefer people don't, but how are you going to acquire millions of dollars in Bitcoin of all things? Like you can't turn to your bank and do that. And so incident response has really taken on this like massive shift that is like really heavily focused on understanding in particular like that extortion focused segment of threats, and the really unique things that you have to do to like make decisions in terms of how you're going to respond, being able to respond to those effectively, and then recover, right? Like figuring out how you have any confidence at all after you've given someone, again, assuming you're in a position where you have to pay a ransom. How do you have confidence after you've done that? Yeah, sure. Maybe you got your systems back. How do you know they're not still there? How do you know you're not going to get extorted again? Like, do you have confidence that you know how this happened in the first place? Because someone will absolutely be willing to come along behind and victimize you again. So there's still a bunch of deep technical aspects of IR. Like that's still absolutely as important as it ever was. But like, there's just such a focus now on like all of the business and financial and legal and like risk management aspects of this that like, we just like that pressure wasn't there before, and certainly not at the scale or volume that's required in the industry today.
Greg, would you care to add to that?
Yeah, and I'd say it's a lot more proactive. I think to Keith's point, it was a lot of like reactive types of like, well, this thing happened. What happened? And we had to go back and do a lot of that investigation to understand what happened. Whereas now we're receiving telemetry in real time. We're seeing these things happen in real time. And not only that, but the attack strategies, both from a kind of red and blue type of aspect, were just kind of, some new attack strategy comes out, we find a way to defend it. Another new attack strategy comes out, we find a way to defend it and identify it. And so it's raised the bar in some ways, but it's also made these strategies and the response capabilities a lot more complex. There's a lot more telemetry to look at. There's a lot more that the threat actors are doing to hide those things, right? And so from when we were doing this type of activity 10, 20 years ago, again, I think Keith nailed it in that a lot of it was reactive and forensic focused, whereas now I see it as very proactive, real-time type of telemetry and understanding like, that's weird. Why is that weird in the context of the overall kind of, situation, I guess, if you will. And that has definitely changed. And it is what it is. It's a daily kind of fun exercise to have.
Greg, a pair of related questions for you and for Keith. And one is, what are the biggest incident response gaps you see? And two, how can organizations start to close those gaps?
Yeah, I think a couple of them. One, I think, is just having that plan. Again, I think going back to some conversations we've had is, does your organization have a plan if things go badly, right? And we have this discussion with customers every time they come on board. It's, okay, what's your IR plan? Some of them very mature. Well, we've got this process, these folks we bring in, and it's great. That's awesome. Other folks, we literally have a box in our portal that says what the IR plan is. And we've seen typed right in there is run away screaming, and that's not a great IR plan, but it's not uncommon that just these are things that have not been discussed. And so I think just starting that conversation, having a plan in place, and that's where we come in. That's where we start to go, oh, okay, there's a pretty big gap. Let's start with your business. And we look at it in business context. And then the other piece, I think, which would come after that is the actual data itself, the telemetry itself. Do we even know what an incident looks like? Can we call an incident what it is? Have we defined it? And do we have that telemetry to even identify it? And so those are kind of like three simple steps, starting out with, do I have a plan? 2, do I have a definition of an incident? And 3, can I actually identify it with the telemetry and the technology that I have right now?
Yeah, and from a gap standpoint, I would kind of add to that, really from like almost like a staffing perspective, or just even kind of understanding the jobs to be done, right? Like in order to incident response depends on knowing you had one in the first place. And so, if as a leader in particular, it's saying, hey, like, do I have a security operations capability in the first place? Like, do I have the intelligence to know what I should be looking for? Can I detect those things? Who's investigating them? Who's responding? Having kind of that framework for security operations in your head and knowing the functions that need to be executed. And then you can come and fill them in a whole bunch of ways, right? You can hire, you can partner. Some of them you can like technology your way out of. Some of them you have to hire, train, you have to operate your way out of. But I would say that's a big gap, right? Is just like, not having that really like that macro level understanding of like what's required to be able to like get to the point where you're doing IR in the first place. And then just, really attacking it from that perspective and saying, hey, like, all right, cool, threat intelligence. I can either like go build this capability, or I can find someone to help me with it and accelerate it. And you kind of rinse and repeat for all of those major functions. So that's not a gap, but I think that's one great way to just think through, where your big gaps are, and then like, where you're going to get the most impact from an investment now.